Let's now shift our attention over to Taiwan, where polls have opened today morning for a presidential and parliamentary election. Over 17,000 polling stations across Taiwan opened their doors nationwide at 8 a.m. and will close at 4 p.m. local time later today. While the polls are eclipsed by the East Asian island's bristling relationship with China, the key issues this election in particular is how close the self-ruled island should take up to its giant neighbor China. The vote will send ripples far beyond its borders, with the two presidential rivals laying out very different visions for Taiwan's future. Here's a quick overview of the contenders. Tsai Ing-wen, the incumbent Taiwanese president who heads the Democratic Progressive Party, which favors an independent Taiwan. Now, Tsai Ing-wen was first elected in 2016 as the president of Taiwan, along with a majority in Taiwan's legislature called WION. Tsai Ing-wen, in her first tenure, tried to steer Taiwan further from China's orbit, and challenging her this election is Han Kuo-yu of the Kuomintang party, which traditionally favors warmer ties with China. Han favors closer economic and cultural ties with Beijing and sees a less adversarial relationship with mainland China to secure Taiwan's economy in the long term. Now let's hear out President Tsai Ing-wen outrightly define the idea of one country, two systems.
香港的年轻人用他们的生命跟血泪为我们示范一国两制不可行。明天 换我们的台湾的年轻人为他们示范，民主自由的价值会克服一切困难的。
Taiwan is the world's 21st largest economy, but ever since 1949, when civil war ended, the Chinese Communist Party has considered Taiwan to be mutinous breakaway province that must be reunited with China by force if necessary. This year, 650 candidates from 43 political parties are seeking to fill 113 seats in the legislature, and the counting will begin when the polling ends today evening. And WION continues to bring you a continuous coverage from Taiwan. And for more perspective, I'm joined in by journalist and special correspondent of the LA Times and Washington Post, Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick, who's joining us live from Hong Kong at this moment. A very warm welcome to you, Ryan. Let me begin by asking, the big fight seems to be between Tsai Ing-wen of DPP and Han Kuo-yu of KMT. While most are aware that this election is being viewed as a referendum on Taiwan's relationship with mainland China, given the developments in Hong Kong, where you are currently, and China's intensifying diplomatic, military and economic pressure on Taiwan, don't you think ideology is dominating the campaign at the expense of economic and social issues?
Yes. Today, Tsai Ing-wen is regarded as leading very substantially in the polls, almost 50%, whereas Han Kuo-yu is trailing behind at somewhere in the quarter. And this would have been unimaginable this time last year, at which point Tsai Ing-wen's approval rating had dipped down to something like a fifth, 20% of respondents, and Han Kuo-yu is leading in the polls. A lot has happened since then. Much of this election is driven by domestic issues like economic development, pension reforms, etc. But Hong Kong has played a substantial part in that. Ever since the protests in Hong Kong against the government, especially the anti-extradition bill, have started, Tsai has really reversed her place in the polls, now leading very substantially. And this has become a big election issue. And in the clip we just heard, Tsai Ing-wen saying that young Hong Kongers were using their lives to show that one country, two systems, the framework which China proposes to bring Taiwan back into its orbit, is unpracticable, that democracy and authoritarianism cannot coexist in the same country. And we've heard this over and over again recently in the electioneering events. Last night, Tsai was introduced on stage as the defender of Taiwan's sovereignty. So this has clearly become not the only issue, but a very central core issue in the election.
Absolutely. It is becoming a core issue, especially with Tsai actually becoming the defender of Taiwan, as you just mentioned. Apart from China, why is the Taiwan election also being keenly followed by Japan and the United States?
Well, Taiwan is very important, both symbolically as the only democracy in the Chinese-speaking world. Also strategically, militarily, as a part of the first island chain, checking China's further expansionism into the Western Pacific. And also Taiwan is regarded as somewhat of a testing ground for Chinese influence campaigns. And in this election, we've seen concerted campaigns, disinformation campaigns to influence Taiwanese media, social media, newspapers, and journalists in order to spread disinformation and influence the outcome of the election. So all around the world, countries are looking towards Taiwan to see what could be coming next for them as China expands its attempts to exploit the openness of democracies around the world in order to influence their societies and their democracies and undermine those systems.
All right. While the attention is on who will lead Taiwan, isn't the election also crucial in terms of who takes charge of its legislature for the next 4 years?
Yes, both of these elections are very important today, both the presidential election and the election for the parliament, the legislative yuan. And although Tsai is leading comfortably in polls for the presidential election, it's a lot closer in the parliamentary elections, although this too has been reversed, where the Kuomintang had a very comfortable lead earlier. Now the DPP has a slim lead. Of course, even if Tsai is re-elected as the president of Taiwan, if she loses control of the legislative yuan, it'll become a lot harder for her to govern in her second term. So both are being closely watched, and the parliamentary elections are even more closely contested. So that'll be just as important to see which party comes out in control of the legislative yuan at the end of today.
Right. Also, Ryan, you know, what's important about this election, what's to be noted is this rigid divide within the electorate between the young voters and the more elderly population. Why don't you give us a better understanding into it?
Yes, indeed. In the past 2 days, there have been the final campaign events for both the Kuomintang and the DPP. First, the Kuomintang rally in Taipei, the age range was skewed considerably older, whereas last night at the DPP's rally, the whole stage was filled with thousands of young people, and they brought a whole group of first-time voters out on stage. There's going to be over 1 million first-time voters in this election, and they're considered to play a substantial role in the outcome of the election. And generally, the younger voters are much more partial towards the independence-leaning DPP, Taiwan's party, whereas older Taiwanese, especially those who came over from the mainland following the Civil War, are much more strongly pro-Kuomintang. So this age divide has existed for some time now, but is becoming more and more stark as new voters increasingly support the DPP or other pro-independence parties.
Right, and it would indeed be interesting to see if these new voters actually are able to make a difference to the newly elected democracy that Taiwan is. Thank you so much, Ryan, for bringing us all those details and sharing in your precious perspective on this newscast. Well, you can stay tuned to WION for a continuous coverage on Taiwan elections throughout the day. For now, it's a wrap of this newscast. Thank you so much for watching.